All right. Hello, San Diego Opera fans, patrons, core group. My name is Melody Moore. You may notice that I'm in a different surrounding here. I am the artistic administrator at San Diego Opera, but today I'm not in San Diego. Today I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm about to go on for Zemlinsky's Lyric Symphony with James Conlon. So that's why I look like this today, little dressy. I am going to hand this over to Kevin soon. I just wanted to go over just a smidge of housekeeping. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat, and then there's a Q&A next to the chat. I would prefer that if you have a question, you type it in a full question form so that we can more easily understand where you're going with the question. And if you have things like just commentary, those can be in the chat as well. And we monitor very well. We just, we keep it going. And if I see something before Kevin does, I tell him. Also, Kevin will begin the Q&A with the first question. The fact that we have less participants than usual is probably because this is the end of the series. Today is our last day doing the Zoom panel. And so in appreciation, before we even start, Kevin, much love to you and the way that you have led us through all of this and moderated and really encouraged questions. It has been my pleasure to get to know you. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Kevin, who will introduce Dr. Texu Kim, who is also doing our pre-show lectures for Madame Butterfly. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, I just want to say hello and welcome to week 5, the final week of San Diego Opera's panels discussing Madame Butterfly and the cultural issues surrounding this monumental work. My name is Kevin Suzuki. I'm a dancer and choreographer and director of the Japanese Folk Dance Institute of New York. We are a company who performs, teaches, and preserves Japanese folk dance traditions, which have existed for over 1,000 years. In addition to my work as a dancer, I also have served on numerous productions of Madame Butterfly, doing workshops, being a cultural and movement advisor to many productions. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I care about these issues because of what I do and also because of who I am. As a half Irish, half Japanese person who definitely is within Japanese culture. And so today's topic is compositional elements in Puccini's Butterfly, cultural themes and quotations. Texu Kim is an associate professor and one of the current presidential research fellows at San Diego State University. Kim has received awards and honors from the From Music Foundation, the Barlow Prize, the Civitella Ranieri Foundation, Copland House, among others. Texu Kim's music, he writes music inspired by everyday experiences, music about modern Korea, reflecting its multicultural nature and music that is humorous yet sophisticated. His music also incorporates and expands Korean folk music elements and systems. An impressive roster of ensembles has programmed Kim's music, including the New York Philharmonic, San Francisco Symphony, San Francisco Opera Orchestra, Minnesota Orchestra, among others, many other illustrious companies. In 2014 through 2016, he served as the composer in residence of the Korean National Symphony Orchestra, and he launched its Composers Atelier program that commissions, mentors, and performs other Korean composers' orchestral works. Now, before I hand it over to Texu Kim, as Melody so kindly stated, we will be doing a Q&A right after his presentation, so please, if you want to write down any of your questions, please feel free to do so as we go through the presentation. Sometimes you might forget something, so please write it down, or if you don't want to do that, you can also start using the Q&A prompt just to remember your questions so that we can answer it right after the presentation. So without further ado, Texu Kim.
Hello, everyone. It is my honor to talk about this monumental piece through San Diego Opera's presentation series. So thank you so much for having me. And to do it justly, I would love to begin this session with a disclaimer. And then let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, so I am a Korean-born immigrant to the USA, which means I'm not a Japanese person, and I don't have the same experiences with those who are, or those, many of those, the panelists before me. And so I was mind blown by the depth of the discussions we had before. And that made me think, actually question a lot about if I'm qualified to do this. Well, because Korea has a very different situation, which ended up with having different perspective that I have. So, for example, we don't have anything like Madame Butterfly to begin with. So we don't have any opera written by someone else using Korean songs or incorporating Korean stories. So I don't even really have the same sentiment about the issues around lots of discussions we had. And also, that is Korean people in general, especially when I grew up, has a very different perspective about active adoption or adaptation of Western culture. So I grew up with this perspective of adopting everything as possible, as much as possible from Western culture under the term of globalization. So, and that has lots of issues, but still that's where I came from. And also the fact that I came from Korea to here, for example, last Melody King talked about her experiences about living in Japan as a child and how it influenced her and how it was different from her experiences growing up in the States. But that's where I came from. So I came from very homogeneous culture where they look for, ironically, outside world. And then that yearning, especially, of course, it comes from the worship of Western culture, European or American cultures, which I understand. And some of that comes from the delicate situation Korea had with Japan. Japan went through a serious westernization right before already the Madama Butterfly was produced. But Korea was a little late on this game, and then going through the situation with Japan, Korean people actually had to rely on Western powers. And so there's a lot more things you may think about, you can think about when it comes to the difference between Korea and Japan in terms of cultural adaptation. And then I am also a composer, but I haven't written anything in terms of opera. And I am a composer, not a researcher or a scholar. So my understanding would be slightly different. I hope, I think my arguments are convincing, but it doesn't come with the same status of the words of researchers. And what I have done in terms of opera is I have written an overture for the San Francisco Opera last year that was premiered to celebrate their centennials. But it's an overture, not an opera. And then I have written some operatic monodramas. So, but still, I wouldn't even call them anywhere close to operas. But I have some experiences, and then so I had lots of questions about myself. But what I have done in terms of today's topic, is I have done a lot of quotations in my music. Because as a Korean person, I grew up I grew up with Western music, and then that in a way freed me up in terms of incorporating different genres and different songs without thinking too much. Because in a way, you can imagine this situation. Nothing is mine anyways. So I can't claim for anything. So I have to deal with two different challenges. I had to, and I still have to. One is to establish my authenticity as a Western music composer. At the same time, now that I have a deeper understanding about quotation, and that I do it mostly with Korean traditional music, and then I have to earn the authenticity about or the permission to use those traditional tunes. Nobody challenges me out from outside, but I have to go through the internal battle. If I'm the right person to do it, we can talk about it, but today is more about Madama Butterfly, so we will talk more about that for now. But so quotation, because I was familiar with lots of different genres and I was keen to stylistic differences, various genres, and then I knew how to use them. And then a lot of people asked me to arrange, especially lots of singers asked me to arrange songs, folk songs or pop songs that are not necessarily sung in classical concert situations. So that made my career actually in before my compositional career. So that being said, we can talk a little bit about musical quotation first to set up what it is. So quotation in Western music history in general comes from a few different meanings. Of course, there are a lot more. I am overly simplifying, but I think this would be a great place to start. So because it explains a little bit about Puccini's approach about quotation as well. It's not just Puccini, it's the baggage of the history. So as soon as people began have the idea of composition, not like naturally grown music or some music who might have written or who might have created and then orally transmitted for a while. And when people began having idea of composition, a lot of them were based on quotation. That was basically the tool of composition. For example, this is one of the medieval chants. This one. This is not that one. Excuse me. This one. Can you hear it? All right. Okay. So this is a medieval chant, Viderunt omnes. And then we will listen to another piece that is based on a Viderunt. And then that shows how people approach to composition to begin with. This is a 13th century piece by Leonen. And then you can hear the Viderunt in the bass, only in the bass, but see how it's modified. Now it's on the second note of the original tune. Wiederund, and now it's wieder. It's not always that stretched. So you just saw a gamut of how they approached the composition. Sometimes they have very elaborated melody on top of it, and then sometimes they go on mostly together with that. But the idea of having a ground a melody, like a descant, adding a descant to that is basically what they thought as a composition in medieval time. And then this is even more elaborated version done by a successor of Leonin. It goes on and on until you see day. Now we are in day. So it's long, but you get the idea. And then up to the level, this tradition goes on and on until, and you know, what does it mean to have this chant in this case? It's a backbone, but of course it comes with some meaning, but the text is not even like a heard. So what's the meaning of using this tune that comes slightly different from a more modern quotation, idea of quotation. But that's where they come from. Up to the level, actually, there is this tradition called motet where multiple lines have different languages. So nobody even can understand what language is being delivered. And then, of course, there is the quotation as a tool to deliver some symbolic meanings. Well, that's the day of wrath, basically, dies irae. And then, of course, if some composers want to use some ominous, create ominous moments, they would incorporate dies irae like this. And as you saw, there is another element about Western composition. It is highly based on variation. When they have some idea, they always have to change things over and over. For example, of course, dies irae, the melody, a fragment of the chant was presented, and then it moves into a different tempo, a little faster, and then different rhythmic figure, ta 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 ta, instead of the original idea. And then those become almost something called motif. So motifs, a backbone of motif is intervals. And there is this da 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 da. I'm not a great singer, I'm sorry. But that three notes comes with something called minor scale, and that is generally connotated to not a happy feeling. And then this is also something you can find in this particular three notes, da da da, is, sorry, may I actually play on the piano. The trichord of a minor scale actually plays also an important role in Puccini's Madama Butterfly, because, well, I mean, the interval is always a good tool to deliver the atmosphere, at least. And then this is a little funny stuff I wanted to just show. Quotation or adaptation comes with changing genres.
When I was young, never needed anyone. Making love was just for fun.
So it's a well-known fact that All by Myself is based on this Rachmaninoff piano concerto, second movement. So this particular video juxtaposed these two to compare how close they are. And of course, that comes with other issues. We can talk about them later if we get there. And then adaptation in Western music history, again, that comes with the idea of expansion, because if you think about Western music history, it began from certain countries, right? And then up to a certain level, up to 20th century or a little and on, it's the history of expansion, of geographical expansion, and all the others. For example, again, you know, I had to, when the others come in, the composers from outside, their adaptation of Western music is not necessarily it's an expansion, but it's more their struggle to be the insiders. But when the composers in the tradition uses the tradition of outside, it's called expansion. For example, a very familiar tune to many of us, and then to many of you probably this just is represented as Western music, classical music, Handel. But back then, in the time of Handel, this comes from a tradition of Spain. So that is a fairly common tradition or trajectory of Western composers to incorporate this idea. And then, of course, there's a plethora of examples, but this one probably is very familiar. And then it comes with the name of exoticism, of course. This type of adaptation comes with a wide range of approaches. So sometimes some adaptations are barely recognizable. Some of them are almost cliche. It's always the danger to navigate between these two extremes. But still, that is a part of adaptation. And then Puccini does it through using scales. And then that's one of the very most common things. Like whenever you encounter gypsy themes, you will likely hear some exotic scales like which was believed to be some sort of exotic gypsy influence. So these were a great tool for the composers to deliver certain flavors if they want, like scales, intervals, rhythms. Saraband, the essence of saraband was the rhythm, ta 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 ta, 1 2 3. But very often it comes with the scales or intervals. And then lastly, of course, in terms of time or the flow of history, chronological history, when people say adaptation, because we can't adapt something from the future, usually it has the connotation of borrowing something from the past. But of course, it's not adaptation if you just follow your teacher's music. It's a natural expansion. So when people say more adaptation or neoclassical or anything with neo, it comes with not the previous trend, but the trends even before. So for example, Stravinsky's music represents this quite a bit. So if I didn't say this is written by Stravinsky, you probably wouldn't even guess. Yeah, it's done by Igor Stravinsky, the Stravinsky that we know, because he went through this phase of neoclassicism, and then that comes with, of course, it has slightly different takes about what classic music. This one specifically sounds more like Baroque music, but this shows some of the approach, like we have to go back, like Renaissance. We have to go back to Greek classics, and all these ideas come in the form of adaptation. So some quotations in Madama Butterfly as starting points, and I am sure many of you are familiar with this moment. Two things I would love to say, but before I say anything, how do you feel when you hear this? I know this is not a really conversation, but
Well, I think they can type it in the chat. I can tell you, Texu, how I have felt is at times swelling of pride, and then at times shrinking into my seat. It depends on a lot that's happening in America. So for me, I can answer. I'm not sure if I'm looking at the chat and I'm not seeing a lot of people answer, but for me, how do you feel?
well, to me, I have a totally different understanding because, again, I came to the States. I moved to the States in 2011, so I don't associate this song with my patriotic value, right? But I can just assume that comes a little bit, but at the same time, also again, quoting Melody King's words, there is certain sentiment toward, well, I'm not even quoting, I'm just paraphrasing her comments, but there is certain sentiment towards America in this opera already, right? Which is not necessarily coming with the pride at some point, right? You have to think about what it is, what the states, what the US did to other countries. And of course, it's very anecdotal, right? Because it's just one person had some issues with another person in another country. But at the same time, because it has been so popular and then it's been watched and then talked about very, very often.
I hear you on that.
Yes, and oh, okay. Somebody mentioned chat is disabled. So
You know, I keep asking about that, but it does, I think it's just not, I don't, Angelica, do you know what's what's happening with that, darling? Chat is disabled. Okay, you know what? Q&A is working. Why don't we put
yes.
our feelings in Q&A? It's not what we normally do, but hey, it's that kind of day, y'all. I'm seeing here chat is disabled, but then it always makes you squirm. And in this opera, absolutely. Every time I hear it, I'm like, something bad's gonna happen. You know?
Yeah, you know this too well in a way, right?
Oh, and Heidi says, for your own information, the Star Spangled Banner was not the US national anthem at the time Butterfly was written. Heidi,
yes.
yeah, thank you for that. But he heard it I mean, why it must have been a quote still that is supposed to elicit a feeling of what, to me, of what that ship coming into the harbor could have meant. And that's a lot of damage. Right. And it's often a colonial desire. So I hear you. It is squirmy.
Right, and thank you for all those comments. And yes, there is another thing we will talk about actually related to the other national anthem. But yes, there is always the context of the song itself, right? The song comes with, now it has a different meaning, but when the song was adapted or the song was popular, songs have their own history. So that's something you have to consider. So thank you to Heidi to bring that up. And also, but you know, you can ask the same question, like, yes, we may feel uncomfortable at times by at this context, but is it really a right thing for an Italian composer to scold American people very indirectly, right? Because he's from a different country. And sometimes we can resonate as, again, you know, if the country is doing well, and then we feel really, really proud with the country, probably you will feel slightly differently about like, why is this happening? For someone else's fault, you know. But at the same time, we all share various opinions, and then we all have some ideas about what this country might have done well, might have not done well. So that resonates with this message sometimes. So that's the power, and that brings a lot of things to a lot of people, actually. And then that's exactly, at this point, I think this one particularly, Puccini knew what he was doing very well, I think. It's because it's, yeah, the starter for conversation, right? Or starter of a thought, right, yes. So exactly, like we think the first time we hear it, especially if you imagine, I know you are so familiar with this opera, but imagine somebody is watching it for the first time and do not know what is going to happen. And then, it's fully hopeful. It's actually a very hopeful sound, right? And the brass, of course, the instrumentation comes with it. It comes with the naval sound, typical, band, not naval, but the band sound that has connotation with the glory or military sound. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Texu, it looks like you have Heidi is so wonderful with these questions. She's so thoughtful. And really, this whole series couldn't have happened without her. So I love to give her the floor whenever I can. Heidi, as a composer, where do you think inspiration and musical quotation end and inappropriate appropriation begins?
great question. And as almost everyone said in this panel series, it depends on the people. Everyone has a different idea. And it's a fine line. And then we can't go back to Puccini and then ask, what did you actually mean? Because he's not here anymore, right? So what matters would be, there are certain things that you have to consider. And then that's actually, may I get back to this a little later? Because I will talk about this. And it's really, really a deep issue we have to think about.
Yes.
Okay, another song that we see, so this is Kimi Kayo. If you want to see it, this is the score. Da, ra, 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 ra. And I mean, I can try pretend like I can pronounce the Japanese, but I shouldn't. So, and then how it sounds. Yes, I have that as well. I think this is good enough for us to understand. So this is what how you would translate His Imperial Majesty's reign, and this is another national anthem, Japanese national anthem, and it also comes with some history. But let's listen. So where was it? That's the first task that we have to deal with, right? So the string part, the violin part, da, 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 that three measures come from actually the third measure, da, 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 da. The 6 beats come from that Kimi Kayo. What's funny is, well, Puccini didn't begin from the beginning to begin with, right? Isn't it like we can skip that part, but at the same time, after that, he goes back to da 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 da, almost like a sampling in hip hop, Like he just dissects a snippet and then just repeat. And then not even that, actually it goes, after that it goes a little further. But he modifies quite a bit already. But the meaning here is quite obvious in this case as the representation of Japan in a way, when especially considering this happens when the imperial commissioner arrives. So again, the complexity about this situation, and but this is a slightly different flavor of major scale. Again, I talked about the scale a little bit. Star Spangled Banner, da 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 da, and that has a very full major triad sound when it was introduced. Within the major scale, this represents more a fuller sound, which goes better with a more bombastic or glorious moment. And Japanese, the kimikayo, the use of kimikayo here also comes with certain intervals. If we see, which itself doesn't sound like a major scale if you just isolate that, but obviously the composer harmonized it with so he added this sound of hopefulness in this case with using so that's the brilliance of Puccini in a way. He just does not adapt. It just not does quote because it fits, but also it should come with the sound that fits to the story, right? I think that's very important. And both of them, interestingly, the minor third here, da, da, and then the first two notes in the Star Spangled Banner, and then those share the same interval, which is very much a very important interval throughout the piece. And those intervals are repeated in the next melodies. Again, if we go back to Star Spangled Banner one more time. Here, it sounds a little ominous, right? That interval is the same notes from da da da, and then that is also the same interval from the Kimikayo when he notated it. And then so he, I think, as a composer's perspective, there should be some consistency about the opera, right? And then it comes from many various angles and tools. In this case, interval must have been an important thing to this composer. It's clear to me, at least, because it addresses this multiculturalism in a way, and then with quoting different tunes, he has to find what's in common between those two lands. Sakura is also a very famous tune. This tune is officially quoted only once, but if you are not familiar with the tune Sakura, So this is Sakura. This is not the best adaptation in my opinion. It does include the koto-like sound, I think. But I'm not sure the harmonization helps in this case. The harmonies, but anyways, that's another story. And this is almost, to answer Heidi's question a little bit. Oh, no, not this one. Okay, I must have, let me just check one thing.
Lips are hard.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. This includes lots of wrong things about adapting Sakura. But it's also to American mind in a way. It's the same song, and then use of the bowl and oversimplifying with all this background. I don't know. I have a little bit of opinion about it, but also I wouldn't be surprised. Modern Japanese people may think differently, considering how mainland Korean people have different opinions about adaptation or appropriation or how to present their own culture. They want to do it slightly differently than like preserving in a very authentic way. There is that trend, but also there is a total different trend to make it more sellable. So yeah, it's another topic. And then that is also something you can hear. That song is already a different song. We will go through that too. Wait, did you hear it? Yes, of course, some people hear it, but if you're not familiar with it, the Sakura tune is do not pay attention too much to the song because song elaborates the melody a little too much, but pay attention to the oboe and the violin sound if you could. Okay, let me sing with it. I hope it works. Da 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 da. So there was that. See, it's actually so. It's not as obvious as when he used the Star Spangled Banner, right? Sometimes it helps to make it super obvious. Sometimes it doesn't, and because it has to fit. Sometimes this melody itself may not work well with the text, right? Text setting, what I meant was. So for example, yes, luckily this works when una cintura, different rhythm, but kind of works. And then there are just simply too many notes to fit in, too many syllables to fit in. So he has to go through un piccolo fe, maggio. And then, of course, he could have fit that into maggio uno, but that doesn't really sound natural, right? If he did it. So that's another consideration when you adapt other songs. And then this is the only occasion that you can actually see obviously, but there's another song that is used around that moment. So this is another genius moment of Puccini. That all the oboe and all the wind plays this. Oh. Okay, good. Do you hear that? That is actually a modified adaptation of a song called Hauta. And then the original version, you will hear it, is. So it is actually a lot of Japanese, Japanese scales. There are two strands of Japanese folk scales. Some is called the pentatonic scale that we are familiar with. And then there is another scale that is a little more based on a minor sound, or even Dorian sound, if you are familiar. Or, can you hear it? Were you able to hear it? Okay. So those two are more minor scale based Japanese music, Japanese scales. And then, so this original song is based on those scales, not a major pentatonic scale. But because of, so let's listen to it one more time. So that's clear. The melody comes is repeated 3 times, so it probably is clear that that is meant to be there. And then he introduced the real one later, right before the sakura comes in. Now we are familiar with this, if you weren't. Another thing that is genius about Puccini here is the notes. If you look at the una cintura, and that is already foreshadowed in when the hauta was introduced for the first time, because of it's both for the change of the atmosphere between and then, but at the same time it helps. Why that key, right? Because it could have been more continuous if the key was the same, but clearly the composer, that is the tonic for a while, and then tonic changes to this, and then suddenly sakura is here. That is the tonic. What's the logic behind it? Well, that first 2 notes are here already when butterfly begin recitativo here, because those are the second and third notes in. So it functions different roles. Again, to Puccini, the intervals and connections are really, really important. And well, because it also helps the singers a lot to find their pitches. And also, of course, great singers can do anything, right, melody? But, but at the same time, it never hurts to help them to find their pitches, and then context in terms of continuity, but also it achieves the color changes in a very savvy way. But Puccini is not good at everything. For example, to me, this is very interesting that this is the very famous, the very beginning. Again, we have heard this many times already, and then the interval is really important. And then what's also interesting about this particular moment is it imitates kind of fugue, right? It's a very agitated fugue. So, but interestingly, what he is not good at, this is, please forgive my language. He's not good at, but he's either intentionally or he's abandoning the normal structure of fugue. So then maybe, well, I mean, knowing that how genius Puccini is, maybe he was intentional, or there must be some reason or not, you never know. Or you can ask, who is good at that? Then Mozart. Mozart is always perfect when it comes to, so for example, the length. The first entrance, da-da-da-da, and then the second entrance, da-da-da-da, and the third entrance, between the first and second, and then second and third, the interval between second and third is always longer. That's the norm of fugue. So that there are multiple reasons, but Puccini doesn't do it, just ignores it completely. And then the instrumentation is also very flexible, which is something you can't find in Mozart fugue. I mean, he does it too, but Puccini does it up to a very more extended way. And then, and this shows his flexibility in a way of, and you know, we think about the quotation and then its integrity, but he was actually abandoning his own Western tradition. I thought it was quite ironic to think about. And, but again, this interval becomes, so in the very beginning, I will talk about this and then move on. Probably we'll have to move on to Q&A. But when Goro sings in the very beginning, I can't find the example right now, so I will just do it. That interval is very important. Da, ra, da, ra. Duplicating that interval is very important, which is also already quite a fashionable thing in Western music history, because that comes with something more likely Lisztian idea. Liszt is not really a fancy person at that point, but the idea of using this particular minor third as a mean of transpose, but keeping the same interval, and then it ends up with this ominous sound, da, ra, 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 the tritone, is also a brilliant technique. And then it's contrasted by rather brilliant sound of and then he intentionally compares these two intervals, perfect fifth, da, ra, and the tritone, da, ra. And then that all is already in the very first fragment. Da, da, da. So it's all very integrated in a genius way. Okay, so let me actually stop share now because I talked way more than I thought, but
You talked exactly enough. And the thing is, how in the world can you start off, Dr. Kim, by saying anything to us about you don't think you're qualified? I just learned a lot. I really appreciate the effort that you've put into this. And I know that Kevin really enjoys to start the Q&A, and we haven't gotten any further questions. I also want to make sure our butterflies here is on the Zoom call. And I know that she would probably have a question or two, or even just want to say, hey, Angie, is it okay if we put Corinne on, give her an invite to say hello on camera while we're getting questions together? Thank you so much. Okay, so Kevin, what are you thinking? I know you were very interested to hear these
Well,
musical themes today.
Yeah, selfishly, I mean, there was a lot of very specific explanation, and selfishly, I was very much enjoying it. If there's other people who don't have as much of a background in music, there are some things that might have been a little bit over some of their heads, but I really, really enjoyed it. So, what I would like to start out with is usually we start out with a question from me, but I want to begin with a question from the chat because it is I think a good place to start as we're doing this. As a composer, where do you think inspiration and musical quotation end and inappropriate appropriation begins? And just piggybacking it on a little bit, is there anything you're specifically careful of when you're quoting?
Sure, that's a great question. And then let me begin more specifically about the creation of Madama Butterfly, right? So the question, if we narrow down the question, did Puccini do a good job, right? That's essence of this, where this question could go into. I think so. Bottom line is, I think so. He didn't visit Japan, or he didn't visit China to get when he wrote Turandot. He did. He had some access to these tunes that through a few resources. One is a lot of these tunes were published at the end of the 19th century in Western notation, and then there is this adaptation by a composer into piano version that was available to Puccini. So he referred to basically depending on the researchers, he quoted 7 to 11 Japanese folk songs. Actually, there are even more than I just said. And Sakura is apparently he used the book by the composer who arranged for the piano. And then he also had composer Puccini met with a wife of consulate at that point from Japan, and then who was able to demonstrate, luckily, how to play some koto with introducing certain Japanese music. So considering how much it would have taken for him to visit Japan during his time, because there was no even airplane, right? So it would have been a lot more commitment considering his time. And then at least he did some research on resources. And then I think he was very proud of it, apparently, because he expected a lot warmer response from the audience about like how different he was by incorporating all this fantastic sound, whereas the audience first there are lots of stories about the premiere, but also one of the criticism he got was it sounds exactly like a Puccini, nothing like a and also, yes, we compare Gilbert Sullivan's Mikado with this. Puccini had a little more genuine approach. There are still issues because he didn't really know a background of this music, and then some resources are not even like clear. Apparently, the transcription of this music, there are several versions. They are slightly different from each other. There is that issue, and then also, so from source to there, and then obviously he lost some meaning when he moved from the original songs to like a truncated songs. And even though there is some connotation he correctly got, like this is song for Prince, so this should go to Prince. That is there, and then but at the same time he can't meet every expectation, right? So And for example, the song, the Miya-san, has similarly to the Star Spangled Banner, it has a complicated history because it was a song very popular during the Civil War in Japan from one side. Okay, so does it represent Japan, the whole Japan? And then there's that history, and then lots of people made different arguments on that song only. So, but in general, I think he did his best as with the available resources. Sorry, it was a lengthy answer.
You've got to stop apologizing. Dr. Kim, I
wonderful.
am just so happy. Oh, Kevin, I think I cut you off.
No. Do we have more time for question and answers, or what would you like
Oh,
to
we
do?
do have more time for question and answers. I did want to let Corinne, because Corinne has given so greatly of her time to be here and has listened through with us. And I know that she doesn't have any because I'm helped make the schedule. Corinne, actually I didn't. Okay, pretend like I didn't say that. But I know the schedule. Corinne, how are you? Will you say hello to our audiences and let them know anything that you've gleaned from today, things that are curious for you, or questions that you have, or things that you want to talk about?
Hey everyone, sorry about all the light back there, although I'm kind of not sorry because this weather is just amazing. But sorry if you can't see me clearly. Yes, I learned a lot too. Thank you so much for that. Because of course, from my side as the interpreter, I do know some about, the background and the writing of Madama Butterfly and the premiere and things like that, but I haven't been able to dive so deeply into the compositional elements. So that was really amazing for me as an interpreter to have that side now. Thank you. From my end, because of course, I'm trying to portray this character in the most authentic but respectful and elegant way possible, as well as, of course, having the music come through my body. So it's obviously going to be skewed a little bit through my own lens, but based on the way this character presents musically and dramatically, I really feel that maybe even if there was a limited knowledge there, and there obviously was, of Puccini's intimate knowledge of Japan and its music and stories and cultural life, I think his intention was pure. And the reason I think that is because of the way he portrays the character and the way that this character is so, and I'm saying this ad nauseum, but I think it's so important for people to know how this character is so multidimensional. She's not a caricature of a Japanese woman or of a geisha in her personality, in her movements, the way she presents. She has all these different aspects of herself. I mean, on a very practical level, being mother, wife, sought after by another man, geisha, young woman, basically teenager to then young adult, which are all displayed through the way her vocal lines are written, as well as dramatically. But even from a personality level, 1 minute she's angry and impulsive, and the next minute so composed and regal, and is very naive and very wise at the same time. And so many other contradictions which really highlight the human nature of this character. And I think if Puccini had really wanted to create this sort of stereotypical idealized version, he wouldn't have created such a dynamic human character. And all of the characters have this, even Pinkerton, who is demonized. But we see this man, of course, this is an American character, not a Japanese one, but we see a young man who is told, well, you can have it all, just have your wife and then go there and have another wife. And he's like, okay, great. But then over the course of 3 years realizes his immaturity and where he went wrong. And the reason I believe this firmly, coming back to our original topic, is the music. The music shows us the depth of his feeling, and it doesn't mean he's not immature and superficial in many ways, and we need to learn from his actions, right? But also we see that there's a part of him that's genuine and that he's not a villain. You know, he's a stupid young man, but he's not a villain. And he, in the end, truly is sorry for what he did. And the redemptive power of the story, the complexity of the characters and the music, I think is what makes it a masterpiece and why it's still being performed and beloved and should be performed. And why these conversations are interesting and should continue to happen, so that we're really considering things from all lenses. But I think your point about Puccini doing his best, I think he really did. And you know, with artists, this will be my last thing in this tirade before we open up to questions again. But I think artists, since the beginning of time, have been blending modalities and blending inspirations from elsewhere with their own style. You know, we see Cezanne, who was incredibly influenced when he went to Tahiti. Of course, he actually went there, but still, he was fascinated with the culture and was incorporating these elements in his art. Artists have been doing this forever. And so I think the expectation, this is just my perspective, of course, but the expectation that Puccini should, you know, be writing in a pure Japanese style wasn't really, I think, his intention or the point. I think it's more of blending his style with his reverence for and fascination with this art form and this culture. And as an interpreter of the music, I think he did it beautifully.
Corinne, I love what you said, and it made me think of what Dr. Texu Kim said. The contradictions in her. He highlighted a place in which a tritone and a perfect fifth were used together. Contradiction, you know, and it is really, it's impressive when you hear more than what I knew, when you hear what the doctor has told us today in terms of how many melodies there actually were. So we have somebody here, Anu, who says, I appreciate Corinne's perspective. Thanks a lot for including her. I'm so happy that you were able to be here with us too. And stay as long as you like. I've got about 20. And so I think we're going to be good because we're in intermission and I'm next. So, and this piece is no joke. What about other questions that have come up? Kevin, do you see anything? I don't.
There's not anything right now. Again, if you have a question about anything that we're talking about, please put it in the Q&A prompt because we'd love to answer any questions. I'll continue with the questions. I just like to know a little bit more about Texu's approach and his compositions. I'd like to know about your compositions. I'd like to know about Korean traditional folk music, how you see it, and when you were quoting from it, what is your process? What is everything about it? What is unique about Korean music? Are there things about it that you don't believe are translatable or quotable and put into a context? What isn't? I'd love to know about your process.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would love to join. What's her name? Yes, Anu's comment in thanking Corinne's perspective. That was beautifully said, much better than what I could have come up with. So thank you. But my sentiment is totally with you, and my appreciation for this piece is definitely with you. And in terms of my music, I'm not sure if it's a place for me to talk about my music again. But it briefly said, I am in some sort of transition because I have quoted a lot. If I had time, I could share things that I have done with quotation. For example, the overture I wrote for San Francisco Opera contains, if I'm correctly, 20-something quotation within 3 minutes. It's like, because it's a celebration of the history of opera, right? I took it seriously and then interwove so many different snippets, mostly recognizable, but I also knew people who know much more about the opera than I could possibly. So I had to challenge them a little bit from incorporating some obscure melodies. So, but in that case, for example, if I do it that way, it's impossible for me to find all the meanings, and then every 10 seconds I can, but that was more festival of melodies, and then all, again, celebrations. Some of them came with the history of that opera company, because the first opera they put was La Boheme, so I had to incorporate La Boheme more seriously. For example, when it comes to Korean, so I had to ask many Korean traditional musicians if I can do this, if I have to do this or not, because I was not sure, because I didn't grow up playing many Korean instruments. I have some, I have played some, I know some. And then I have some personal connections to certain music, especially the percussion music, because I played those when I was young, but interestingly, a few commissions I got from Korean National Orchestra, which is a Korean orchestra. So if you think about Korean instruments on the stage as an orchestra, a large ensemble of Korean instruments, sometimes with adding some other, then very often they come up with this idea of adapting existing Korean music and then make a new music out of that. That's a very common request to composers these days. And then because it's to them, it's their way of preserving the culture, because they believe if there are more dialogues between artworks, then the tradition becomes stronger. And then also mainland Korean people are way more open to modifying their own culture compared with it's a kind of immigrant situation that they are more stick to authenticity sometimes. And then but that was my experience working with Korean traditional instrument players or singers. They always say, do whatever you want, please be bold, that's. But now I am moving a little toward abstraction approach. So Korean rhythmic patterns, I use some concepts. For example, there's da, 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 always you come with dichotomy of low and high drum sound, dum, dum, da, da, da. And then I use that, but with a different pattern, da, 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 da. Something you may not hear in actual Korean music, because more and more people in Korea are aware of this copyright issue now. So some people begin to claim copyright on their melodies, which is a new trend in Korean traditional music. It's an oral transmission or orally transmitted tradition, but it's complicated, which is whose creation. But there is that discussion going on. And also I take the model of Bartók and Stravinsky, especially Bartók a lot, because his idea is not just doing the same melody, but to see where it can go. So, for example, Korean melodies have this, again, I pay attention to scales. So always there is this pattern. It's a very common pattern in Korean music. So always the low note comes with a vibration. And then there is a direct note, the, and then the, always with these notes. And then my approach is, I think that's beautiful. That's where people stay when it comes to improvisation. Like they improvise based on this scale. And it's a fascinating thing, but I would love to make it more abstract. Does it have to be those notes, or does it have to always go down or go up? So I'm trying to expand as much as possible with the concepts, because I am very fortunate to be positioned into have all this access because of my previous works with Korean musicians, and also thanks to internet. but also I have this perspective of outsider. So, and more or less, you know, I have a background in chemistry, so I'm experimenting with not experimental music wise, but with familiar sound, but still, you know, you can adapt this how they sing into a different thing. So that's where I am.
That reminds me of the left-handed side of a carbon molecule and the right-handed side of a carbon, or you know how right. It depending on where methyl or ethyl is, you got a totally different thing.
Yes, mirror image. You're talking about the
Yeah,
mirror
the mirror image. Yeah. I only know that because of wine. I went to UC Davis during pandemic and got a degree in winemaking and fermentation science. So I did the chemistry.
You probably have a
Oh
better idea.
God.
Yeah, better memories.
Yes. Any other questions that we have? Burning desires, I always say. Does anybody have burning desires? I am so grateful to Kevin for this entire series. Kevin, did you get a little gift from me in the mail? Not yet.
I haven't checked the mail today, so I will
Aha.
look.
Okay.
I will look.
Corinne, your gift is coming. I made sure that our cast dinner was partially vegan for you. Yes, today it popped into my head. Oh my Lord, do we have anything for her to eat? Yeah. Dr. Kim, and I know you keep telling me to call you Texu, but we're on, you know, this is a different format and you deserve every bit of honor and praise. And I want you to stop this apology thing that you're doing because you're amazing. I am so appreciative of those who joined this entire time and for the entire series. We've been up, we've been down, we've been around. And I hope, all I ever hoped, was that we suppressed no opinion, that we heard all opinion, and that in hearing it and metabolizing it, that we came out with a perspective that potentially causes us to be better humans to each other and to relate in a way in which we think before we speak. That's all I wanted. I'm very happy that we got that here. I really believe we did. Thank you all, and Kevin especially, for all you've done for us. So I will say good night before I'm gonna go warble for like 5 minutes and hope that that's good enough. You know, Corinne, you can talk about this. Sometimes when you've been singing for days and days on end, you actually don't even have to warm very much, right? Yeah, it's there. All right, thank you all. And we will be seeing you at Madama Butterfly. Bye, everybody.